Their U-boat was approaching this shore, underway for 2 full weeks, crowded, for the most part running deep and silent.
Walk on the shores of the United States with the plan, the design, the equipment, and for most of them, the intent to cause an amazing amount of damage in this country. Terror.
They were going to destroy the New York City waterworks. And they were also going to plant bombs in train stations and Jewish-owned department stores so as to create terror among the population.
Farewell party in a local nightclub. George Dash and Ernst Peter Berger have a short conversation.
Berger, is it true that you were in a Gestapo prison?
That dog Himmler will have to suffer for that.
Look here, boy. I didn't hear what you just said. And you never heard my question about prison. You'll forget the whole thing right now, okay? The time will come when we can talk about it. Do you get that?
Yes.
Now, mention, you know that I have always treated you all right. Now, you gotta do right by me. Don't foul up. Remember, no reprisals against any team member who kills anyone trying to expose the plan. But I know all of you are going to do a great job. I picked you myself. You got the best training. You're going to undo a lot of damage that Traitor Seabold did. You are going to do a really great job. And you are going to be well rewarded, and so am I. Colonel Laushausen wanted to be here tonight to speak to you himself, but he couldn't make it. He told me to wish you the best of luck. I myself wish you a pleasant leave. Today is May 2nd. Be in my office on Monday, May 18 at 9 a.m. The following week, we will ship out Doc's group first to New York, then Curling's group a day or two later to Florida. Always remember, man, this job comes from the Fuhrer himself. Remember, that's the Fuhrer up there, because you didn't recognize him. His eyes are on you. Our flag is dearer than life. The Fuhrer's eyes are on you. Heil Hitler!
End of Act 1.
Men cracked down on Nazi saboteurs. With quiet efficiency, J. Edgar Hoover's federal detectives checked would-be destruction almost fantastically planned. On the Florida coast...
Hoover announced that he had cracked a gang of saboteurs who, as he put it, had come to America to kill and maim Americans and destroy Americans.
Dash and the other 7 are jailed in one-man cells in the District of Columbia jail. The FBI would keep Dash's role in breaking the case a classified matter. Critics argue this was unfair to Dash. J. Edgar Hoover saw it as a matter of national security, as well as a political bonanza for himself and his bureau.
He wanted to deter future groups of saboteurs from coming to the United States. So he wanted to project a picture of an all-powerful, omniscient FBI that was so efficient that it could intercept any team of saboteurs coming into the United States.
George Dash believes that he will someday be branded as a hero. Instead, he is about to change from terrorist to political pawn as President Franklin D. Roosevelt orders that he and the other saboteurs face the ultimate penalty.
By a submarine at Amagansett, Long Island. An unarmed Coast Guard patrolman discovers them. Dash refuses to accompany him, so he heads back to the station to report. Dash and the other 3 saboteurs take the train to New York City. Dash and Berger agree that the plan is impossible to carry out. They decide that Dash will go to Washington, D.C. later in the week to report everything directly to J. Edgar Hoover. That very day, Dash phones the FBI in New York to say that he will be at the Washington office of the FBI later that week.
Yes, sir, I asked him to come down here, but he said he didn't know how to get here. He said he was the leader of a group of men who just came from Germany.
Well, did you have him picked up? Probably some nut. But after that report from the Coast Guard, we got to talk to every crank and his uncle.
Yes, two of the men went down to pick him up at the hotel. He should be here any minute now.
Good. We'll listen to his story and then send him packing.
A knock at the door.
Come in, come in.
I must insist on speaking to Mr. Hoover himself. I must protect a number of people who are innocent in Germany and keep this as confidential as possible.
I am Mr. Ladd, and I am direct assistant to Mr. Hoover. This is Mr. Trainer. This is where you will stay until we know who you are and what you want. Please sit down. Get a chair, Trainer, for Mr. Dash.
But when I called, I said I was Franz Josef.
Now, Mr. Dash, what is your business with the FBI?
You mean no one told you that I was coming to Washington? Well, my name is George John Dash, and last Sunday I telephoned the FBI in New York and then told the man there that my name was Franz Daniel Pastorius, that I arrived the day before from Germany.
You?
And that,
You?
yes, the agent in New York wanted me to go down to his office and tell him about it, but I told him my information was only for Mr. Hoover in Washington. I told him that I was making the call so that there would be a record, and I told him to let you know here in Washington that I was coming here on Thursday or Friday. You're sure that you never got the message?
No.
He said he would let you know. Well, I will tell you. Pastorius was the name of our mission. My men landed last Saturday morning from a German submarine, and we...
Now listen, Mr. Pastorius. If you think German submarines can just approach the shores of the United States of America and land their men, you are very much mistaken.
My name is Dash, George John Dash. Pastorius is the cover name of the mission. I'm the leader of a group of men who landed from a German submarine last Saturday. And last Wednesday, another submarine landed in Florida with 4 more men.
I think, Mr. Dash, you have been reading too many spy novels.
You've got to believe me. I came to cripple the United States, but I considered my duty to do everything to prevent the sabotage. And that is why I'm here to report to Mr. Hoover.
And how many men were with you?
There are 3 others. Ernest Peter Berger, you can find him in New York City. It's the Governor Clinton Hotel. And then there's Heinrich Heinck and Richard Quirin. They're in New York too. Berger will help you find them. And I will go with you and help you find the groups that landed in Florida.
I don't think that will be necessary. Just continue with your story.
We were all trained in a special sabotage school near Berlin. Lieutenant Walter Kappa hired us and was our supervisor. We were taught how to start fires with incendiary bombs in factories and war plants, and how to blow up bridges and railroads. We had to memorize the location of important war plants.
Such as?
Such as the aluminum company in Messina, New York.
And tell me, Mr. Dash, did your superiors tell you to contact any Germans already in this country?
Oh, yes.
He pulls out of his inside jacket pocket an ordinary white handkerchief and hands it to Ladd.
Here you are. There's secret writing on that handkerchief. It's got the names and addresses of our contacts here in the States. Something smelly will bring out the writing.
Oh, well, we wouldn't want to do any harm. No. Tell me, Mr. Dash, have you any family in Germany?
Oh, yes, my mother is there, my uncle, my sister Claire, my cousin.
Well, we wouldn't want any harm to come to any of them now, would we?
Oh, no.
No, of course not. So we will have to work very carefully and very secretly, so they don't know in Germany that you told us anything, all right?
Absolutely, sir.
Trainer, send that down to the lab, please. Tell them to hurry and come right back. Tell McGee something smelly should bring it out. George, are you quite comfortable?
Oh, yes, sir.
Cigarette?
No, thank you. Do you think that I will have the opportunity to meet Mr. Hoover and the people who are in the business of propaganda, who I wish to correct? They are making mistakes. I know by listening to their propaganda work. Very weak.
Oh, we'll see about that later. Pi, you better lock that door. Now, George, take your time and continue your story.
There's a loud click as Trainer bolts the door. End of Act 2.
1 month after the arrests, Dash sits in a courtroom alongside the other 7 men who had been secreted into America by German submarines. Because no acts of terrorism have actually been carried out by the 8, President Franklin Roosevelt is advised that their sentences in a civil court might amount to only a few years in prison. Roosevelt announces the 8 will face a military tribunal, a rarely invoked legal process that allows the FBI to keep the details of the saboteurs' easy landing on American soil a secret. The tribunal would conceal the real story from Germany, that the FBI had foiled the mission only because of help from George Dash, and it would allow the government to seek the death penalty.
Franklin Roosevelt decides on a military commission to try the 8 saboteurs who've been rounded up by the FBI thanks to Dash's help. The Judge Advocate General Myron Kramer and Attorney General Biddle will prosecute. Colonel Cassius M. Dow and Colonel Keith Royal and Colonel Carl R. L. Ristine for Dash will defend. Major General Frank McCoy presides. The trial opens. All defendants plead not guilty. They're charged with violating the law of war, the 81st and 82nd Articles of War, and conspiracy. The prosecution presents its case and demands the death penalty for all.
Agent Trainer, do you know the defendant, Dash?
I do.
I show you P11, already marked, and ask you whether you recognize it.
I recognize that as the handkerchief taken from George Dash.
On what day?
June 19.
What did Dash say the handkerchief was?
Dash informed that this handkerchief contained the names and addresses of certain persons written on it in secret ink.
Did he then give you the reagent of the handkerchief to produce the writing?
No, but he did say it could be brought out by a certain smelly fume, but he could not recall the name of it.
Did he tell you who wrote on it?
He advised me that it was written on by himself in the presence of Lieutenant Naab of the German High Command, and in the presence of Gerling, the other team leader.
And what did you do with it?
I gave it to Mr. Parsons of our Bureau Laboratory.
I show you Exhibit 12. Do you recognize it as being a photograph of a handkerchief with the writing on it?
Yes, sir.
Will you please tell us what the first address is?
The first word is Mara. Da is the second word. The third word written very indistinctly and could not be read. The fourth word is Lopez, then Lisboa. The next words we could read were something like Mascarenas 52.
What did Dash tell you about that address?
Dash informed that it was the name and address of persons in Lisbon, Portugal, with whom he had been instructed to communicate in the case they needed more money. In case they wanted to pass on information, such as what papers a succeeding group would need in order to effect a landing and mix with populace without detection. In case they needed more explosives sent over. Anything of that nature could be communicated to this address.
And what is the next address?
The next line reads Father Kreger or Krepper. And the next line, Grens Frey, Route RFD2, Box 40, Rahway.
And what did Dash tell you about that address?
Dash advised me that this was the name of a Lutheran minister whom they were to contact by use of the code phrase Franz Daniel Pastorius. They were to say, greetings from Franz Daniel. And this man was to say, Pastorius.
And the following lines?
The next line started with bingo.
Bingo?
I questioned Dash as to what he meant by bingo. He advised me that this was German intelligence name of Hubert Haupt, and that each man assigned to the German intelligence was given a name. Haupt's intelligence name was Bingo. His own name, he started, was Strich, which is German for a short dash.
Thank you. And after Bingo, what is written?
After Bingo comes the name Walter Freiling, and then the address 3643 or 8543 Whipple, Chi, Chicago.
Did Dash tell you who he was?
Walter Freiling, he stated, was a relative of Hubert Haupt in Chicago. He was a member of the German-American Bund, who was an individual who could locate for them a hiding place for their explosives, a contact, so to speak.
And on the next to last line?
That line has the name Helmut Lehner and 2158 73rd Street, Astoria. Dash said he was a friend of Caroling's, though whom he could always locate and contact Caroling.
The defendant Caroling?
Yes, sir. The leader of the other group. Dash and Edward Caroling were to meet in Cincinnati on July 4th. In the event that that meeting failed in Cincinnati or that they otherwise lost contact with one another, Dash had this secret address whereby he could get in touch with Caroling.
That is all, I think. You may cross-examine.
Mr. Travnor, did the defendant Dash get in contact of his own free will and accord with the FBI in New York by telephone before coming to Washington?
He said he did.
Did Dash of his own free will get in contact with the FBI in Washington?
Yes, sir. At least so he said.
During the entire interrogation in which you participated, Dash did, insofar as he could, answer any questions which the FBI agents asked him as freely and as fully as he could. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, Mr. Travnor, did Dash tell you when he formulated the idea that he would not go through with this plan when he got to this country, but would contact some person in authority about the matter?
To the best of my recollection, it was sometime during the later part of November 1941 or December.
Did he tell you that he was very desirous of getting away from Germany in order to fight the ruling powers of Germany?
Yes, sir. He made that statement.
Did Dash tell you that after he arrived in Washington and registered at the Mayflower Hotel, he called the FBI?
Not immediately.
Well, I believe you said he called.
Yes, sir. The next day.
He got in late the day of arrival, did he not? Did he tell you when he got in?
Yes. He got in around 7 p.m. Thursday. Then he went out to dinner.
And it was the next morning that he made the phone call?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead. Tell us what occurred the next day.
Well, Dash called the FBI and asked to speak to Mr. Hoover. He was referred to me, and he told me he had some information. And I told him that someone would come out to his hotel and get him, since he said he did not know the way.
Did he have a book with him when he came over to the FBI?
I saw an address book that he had.
Did it contain the names of any important persons in Washington?
It had one name that I recall.
And what name was that?
Francis Biddle.
That is the...
That is the Attorney General.
Did he tell you that when he came to Washington, he desired to get in touch with some person in authority and mentioned Mr. Biddle as being one of the persons recommended to him?
He said he wanted to get in touch with someone in authority in Washington. Mr. Biddle's name, as I recall, was given to him on the evening that he appeared in Washington.
As being an appropriate person to get in touch with?
Yes, sir.
The Attorney General is interested in whether you know who recommended him.
Yes, sir, I do. According to Dash's statement, it was this waiter, Louis Martin. I believe was his name. Dash recognized him at the restaurant where he was having dinner. He gave Dash the name.
There are, Mr. President, quite a few matters which I still wish to make inquiry about, but there is nothing further. I desire to ask at the present time before we adjourn.
Anything further on the part of either side before we adjourn?
Nothing further, sir.
The commission will adjourn until 2 o'clock.
End of Act 3.
Opening arguments are about to be heard at the Hall of Justice in the secret military tribunal of 8 accused spies.
Actually, the trial was a bizarre mix of secrecy and circus. Outside, the prisoners were brought from the district jail up to the Hall of Justice each day. There were people lined up and down the streets that they were brought by these kind of Black Mariah vans, and there were armored cars and motorcycles leading them in and out, soldiers everywhere. Everybody wanted to see the Saboteurs. Once they got inside, once they pulled in that garage, there were 2 machine gun armed half-tracks guarding the basement entrance. They were brought in, it was shut down.
Act 4. The defense presents its case. Colonel Royal tries to interest the Supreme Court in the case.
The commission will open. Please proceed, Colonel Royal.
May it please the commission, the defendants represented by Colonel Dowell and myself desire at this time to make a motion. A motion for a verdict of not guilty for lack of evidence for the charge of spying. Spying must take place in a zone of military operations. The prosecution maintains that there was a patrol by the Coast Guard along the beach. It appears, however, that it was an unarmed patrol and that, therefore, it surely was not a military operation. Another requisite for spying is that it must give aid to the enemy. I do not believe that the evidence remotely shows that. According to the prosecution's testimony, these men came over here for the purpose of sabotage, not spying. I am not contending that sabotage is not a crime, but I am contending that sabotage is not spying.
Colonel Ristine, is your defendant, George Dash, included in this motion?
If the commission please, I should later like to make a separate motion with respect to my client, Dash.
Please continue, Colonel Royal.
Now, as regards the charge of spying, we must also consider the handkerchief with the secret writing that we have heard testimony about. On that handkerchief was an address in Lisbon, and I do not think that we can properly deny that Curling and Dash, the 2 group leaders, might have, under some circumstances, transmitted some information to Lisbon. Now, as far as I can recall from Dash's exhaustive statement, the only information that was to be given by the 2 leaders was whether they needed more explosives, more registration cards, or more money. That is an entirely different offense from one reporting on the fortifications, encampments, of military operations. It is of considerable moment to these defendants whether this is the crime of spying or not. For any other offense that is charged here, the matter of punishment is discretionary. But if these men are properly tried and convicted upon the charge of spying, the sentence is mandatory death. We trust the commission will grant this motion for dismissal of the 3rd charge, that of spying, for lack of evidence.
The Judge Advocate General.
May it please the commission, we would like to reply to the motion. Counsel contends that Amagansett and Porte Vedre are not zones of military operation because there was not a soldier there. We all know that it is impossible to protect our Atlantic coast with guards for every mile of the way. Whatever may be the particular defensive means that are used as to invaders is a matter dependent upon the particular locale situation and the local commanding officer. In this case, it was under the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard was patrolling that post as it saw fit. With regard to the intent to communicate, I would like to read from the 82nd Article of War, the 3rd subparagraph of the section entitled Being a Spy. It is necessary to prove an intent to communicate information to the hostile party. This intent will very readily be inferred on proof of a deceptive insinuation of the accused among our forces, which is here. But this inference may be overcome by very clear evidence that the person had come within the lines for a comparatively innocent purpose, as to visit his family, or that he assumed a disguise in order to reach his own lines, which we most assuredly do not have here. It is not essential that the accused obtain the information sought or that he communicated. The offense is complete with the lurking or dissimulation with intent to accomplish these objects. And that, we claim, is fully proven in the evidence submitted by the prosecution.
Is there a desire on the part of any member of the commission for clarification on the part of either side? The commission will close.
Well, as you know, Justice Black lives in Alexandria. I don't know him well, but he is a fellow Southerner. I phoned him and asked him if I might drop in. I saw him, but he was not sympathetic to the idea of trying to convince the Supreme Court. He declined to do anything. There are new developments, however.
Did he change his mind since last night?
No. Last night, I thought there was no way to get the Supreme Court to consider this case. Justice Frankfurter, my former law professor, I understood, was vacationing in Connecticut. I had to be in court. There was no possibility for me to go up there. However, did you see the notice in today's Post of the funeral of former Justice George Sutherland?
I did.
And that Justice Owen J. Roberts, representing the court, would attend the services?
I recall that.
I hardly know the man, but it was the only chance. When we recessed for lunch here, I went to Justice Roberts' office and waited there for him.
Any luck?
Oh, yes. I saw him. I told him briefly that we wanted a civil test of the President's proclamation and the jurisdiction of the Military Commission. He suggested that we go to his farm outside of Philadelphia later this week, prepared to argue our position. Furthermore, he'll try to get Justice Black there, too. And if both of them can agree, he'll telephone Chief Justice Stone and ask him to convene a special session of the Supreme Court.
My congratulations, Colonel.
Justice Roberts suggests bringing Biddle along so the prosecution will have sufficient notice. Will you two come?
To me, it seems wiser if I don't join your appeal. Since I am representing only Dash, I think it's better to keep his case separate from the others.
I understand. And you, Colonel Dowell?
Oh, you make it very difficult for me. You're a lawyer first. I'm a 40-year man. For 40 years, I've been trained as a soldier. I can't get it out of my mind that my duty is to carry out the orders of my superior officer, in this case, the Commander-in-Chief, President Roosevelt, who detailed me to act as defense counsel before this commission. And now you suggest that I question the legality of Roosevelt's military order creating this commission and his proclamation charging the defendants? You want me to ask the Supreme Court to decide?
Precisely.
On the other hand, I've studied law, even taught law, and I am most familiar with the court's martial manual. And that charges us to guard the interest of the accused by all honorable and legitimate means known to law. It is for me a dilemma.
The commission returns.
The commission is open. The motion of counsel for verdicts of not guilty for insufficient evidence respecting charge 3 spying in violation of the 82nd Article of War is not sustained. Has the defense any other motions?
If the commission please, it is my contention that the evidence to date, taken in the most favorable light for the prosecution, does not make out a case against George Dash. The FBI agents who proposed a plea of guilty with 6 months incarceration followed by a pardon certainly were agreed that Dash was not guilty, or else they could not have made such a proposal. I say, therefore, the prosecution has not made a case at all.
Colonel Royal, are there any more motions at this time?
May it please the commission, when we make this motion of dismissal on behalf of the defendant Berger, We do so with the firm conviction that from a legal standpoint, he is entitled to a verdict of not guilty. Of course, if the prosecution's attitude is that we ought to go through and say that everybody is guilty and let the president pardon, I'm talking to no purpose. But I'm sure that is not the commission's disposition. Now we have a situation in Berger's case where his confession has been corroborated by every circumstance and fact. No one can doubt the fact that if the confession be true, Berger is guilty of nothing under the charges. We hope you will grant our motion for a dismissal of all charges against the defendant Berger.
Judge Advocate General?
The question here is simply whether or not the prosecution has submitted evidence against the accused which in its most favorable light makes out a prima facie case, whether it has established enough evidence to go to trial. As a matter of fact, the evidence shows that these men crossed our lines carrying dynamite and other explosives and operated under orders to destroy and sabotage wartime facilities. That in itself raises a clear presumption of guilt. The accused have not in any sense of the word overcome that presumption of guilt. They have by their confessions attempted to lay a foundation for a defense that they never did intend to do it. But the fact remains that they did come through our lines, that they did bring in dynamite, and that they did assist others in doing so.
Colonel Royal?
We will admit that it was shown that Berger did bring those explosives ashore. However, every one of the charges includes, as an essential element, the purpose on the part of the defendant to commit acts of sabotage or spying. And it is impossible upon this evidence to find at this stage any intent by the defendant Berger such as is charged by these bills.
Is there a desire on the part of any member of the commission for a clarification on the part of either side? The commission will close.
Lights go down briefly and then come up again.
The commission is open. The commission rules first with regard to the motion of defense counsel to dismiss charges against the defendant Dash. The motion is not sustained. The commission further rules that with regard to the motion of defense counsel to dismiss all charges against the defendant Berger, the motion is not sustained. We shall now adjourn until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
The lights dim on all but defense counsel table.
While the commission was closed, I telephoned Justice Roberts. We are invited to his farm for lunch on Thursday. Justice Black will be there. Now, I must try and get space on an Army plane going to Philadelphia, and I sincerely hope, Colonel, that you will be on that plane with me. Biddle will surely bring Kramer. I will need you.
Very well, Colonel. I will be there.
Thank you. And you, Colonel Ristine, will you join us?
Thank you, but I believe I shall continue to keep Dash's case separate from the others.
I quite understand. Colonel Dowell, you and I will meet at Andrews Air Force Base at 10 a.m. Thursday?
Agreed.
End of Act 4. Act 5. It is Monday, July 27, 1942. J. Edgar Hoover is always present in the courtroom. He never speaks, but now and then reacts.
May the record show that the Military Commission will adjourn the hearing until Friday, July 31st, in order that Attorney General Biddle and Colonel Royal may participate in the hearing before the Supreme Court of the United States. May the record so show.
It may.
The lights dim, the stage is dark, a radio is
The
heard.
history-making session of the Supreme Court is being held today. In a startling move, Chief Justice Stone called the special session with the approval of his 8 colleagues. The court will consider whether President Roosevelt was authorized to order a military trial for the saboteurs, and whether the military commission conducting that trial was legally constituted, and whether the Nazis are being held in lawful custody.
The instant case presents a real test of our democratic form of government and its judicial system. It is trite but still true to say that the soundness of any system of government proves itself in the hard cases when there is an element of public clamor. Such circumstances test the real ability of a government and its judicial system to protect the rights of an unpopular minority.
The United States and Nazi Germany are fighting a war to determine which of the two of them shall survive. This case is no more than a small skirmish, but on an important front. It is part of the business of way. Wars today are fought on a total front, on battlefields of joined armies, on the battlefields of production and transportation and morale, by bombing and sinking of ships, by propaganda, and by sabotage, and by spying.
The lights go out and the radio comes on again.
The Capitol is anxiously awaiting a Supreme Court action on the 7 Nazis. Attorney General Biddle and Defense Counsel for the 7 Saboteurs, Kenneth C. Royal, began their pleas before the high bench today. Opinion in the Capitol varies. When asked, Representative Emanuel Seller of Brooklyn urged swift action against the saboteurs. Our people, he said, are of the opinion that the 8 Nazi saboteurs should be executed with all possible dispatch. They are confident that the military tribunal will decree their death. Any interference with that trial by a civil court would strike a severe blow to public morale.
The lights come up on the full courtroom. It is Friday, July 31st.
Is the defense ready with summation? You may proceed, Colonel Royal.
May it please the commission, we believe that these men have done nothing. Even if we take every word and every inference of the prosecution's contentions to be correct, that warrants the infliction of the death penalty. They did not hurt anybody. They did not blow up anything. But if it be said that their intentions were bad, the law considers not merely the intent of a man, but the result and the accomplishment in determining what the sentence shall be. And that is written into every law, in the manual for courts martial, and in the criminal statutes of every state and of the United States. Let us apply that distinction to this case.
One moment, please, Colonel Royal.
McClure has just been handed a note by Munson.
Mr. Attorney General, I understand there is agreement that counsel would like to recess early.
I should think at about 11:40. The Supreme Court is to meet at noon to render its decision.
We will proceed until such time. Please continue, Colonel Royal.
May it please the commission, what did these men do? Let us assume that these men did come over here intending to commit sabotage. Suppose they had reached that point in their hearts where they thought this was the thing to do, yet they did not do it. If a man had planned to blow up a railroad bridge, but had done nothing except buy the explosives and bury them miles away from where he was going to commit the offense, a court would not give him very long sentence. Let us put the proper perspective on this case. These men may have planned something, but they have not done any terrible thing. They prepared to do some things which, if accomplished, might have been terrible, but they did not do it. Let us not let the fact of war absolutely change the character of what they have done. Give it weight, yes, but do not let it destroy our entire perspective of just exactly what has happened. These men have done nothing to hurt America, to hurt her in the defense in this war. They may have intended it, but they did not do it.
Thank you, Colonel Royal. Has defense anything further?
This is supposed to be Dowell.
If it please the commission, Charge 3 accuses the defendants of lurking or acting as spies in or about the fortifications, posts, and encampments of the United States. That the defendants acted under false pretenses, we do not deny. We strongly dispute, however, that they were endeavoring to obtain and communicate military information onto the enemy. There has not been a scrap of evidence to substantiate this charge. All the defendants were given a 2-hour course, I believe it was, in writing in secret ink. But they all testified this was to be able secretly to communicate among themselves. 2 of the defendants, may I include here your client, Colonel Listine?
You may include George Dash, Colonel Dowell.
Thank you, Colonel Listine. Only the 2 group leaders, Dosh and Kelly, who carried the handkerchiefs, knew of their existence. They testified that they had been instructed to use the Lisbon address written in secret ink on the handkerchief to communicate back to Cobb. But neither one had instructions to communicate any military information. They were to advise Cobb about future sabotage missions or inform him of any additional things they needed. The 2 never used this mechanism. You will recall they were all apprehended within 2 weeks of landing.
Hoover smiles with pride. The other defendants eye Dash and Berger with hostility.
Thank you, Colonel Dowell. Do I understand, Mr. Attorney General, that you think we can meet again at 2 o'clock?
The court meets at 12. I think we can safely say 1:30.
Very well. We will recess until 1:30.
Page 1 of the New York Times.
This just in from the New York Times. Army spy trial upheld by court. Ruling unanimous. Supreme Bench backs President's power over invading saboteurs. Chief Justice Stone read a per curiam opinion holding that the charges against the men's alleged offenses for which the President was authorized to order a military trial, that the commission was legally constituted, and that the Nazis were held in lawful custody.
Lights up on the full court.
The commission will now come to order. Colonel Royal, you may proceed.
I say at this point, only by way of brief summary, we think none of these men are guilty of spying because the charge did not show it, and the facts did not show that they ever endeavored to obtain information for the purposes of communicating with the enemy. We say on the other charges that even if you give them a very liberal construction, they are not guilty of any offense which, either by precedent of the criminal law or any other precedent, should be punished with extreme severity.
Colonel Ristine?
If the commission please, I should like to say a few words for the defendant Dash. You have heard enough evidence now to know that, except for the action which the defendant Dash took, this would in all probability be an unsolved problem today. I do not think that eminent counsel for the prosecution will dispute the proposition that it was Dash who came to Washington and laid this case with the FBI with the solution appended thereto. Why, I submit, gentlemen of the commission, that every one of these charges must fail, if that be true, and that is but just one and fair finding that you can bring in, and that is, we find the defendant Dash not guilty of every charge.
Will you continue, Colonel Royal?
It has been a difficult task to argue about all these defendants. It is difficult to be fair to all and present the case of one. We have sought to do it. We are convinced they are different. We are convinced these men are not guilty. We are convinced that none of them has committed a violation which justifies, from the standpoint of justice, from the standpoint of policy, from the standpoint of national defense, the extreme penalty or anything approximating. I think we've got to realize that this decision here today is a very important one for America. We are fighting to preserve our own system of government. The distinction of the American system of government is that we provide an orderly procedure, whether it be military or whether it be civil. and that we administer that procedure with equity and justice in times of stress as well as in times of peace and quiet. In other words, we are not a fair weather government. We have a government that is not only, as we would call it down in North Carolina, a government in Sunday go-to-meeting clothes. It is supposed to wear a garb that can be worn all the time, under all circumstances and in all cases, preserving our administration of justice on an even keel. We want to win this war. We are going to win it. But we do not want to win it by throwing away everything we are fighting for. Because we will have a mighty empty victory if we destroy the genuineness and the truth of democratic government and fair administration of the law. You know, the real test of a system of government is not when the sun is shining, but when the weather is stormy. Anybody can administer justice when the sun is shining, when things are peaceful, and when there is no stress or excitement. It takes a man to administer our system of government when that is not the case. With these remarks, we leave the matter to the Commission.
Thank you, Colonel Royal. Is the Judge Advocate General ready to proceed?
May it please the Commission. After listening to the arguments on behalf of the defendants, it seems to me that their idea of a proper charge to be brought before this Commission would have been worded somewhat as follows. In that Berger and all the rest of these defendants with the intent to defraud the German government did in Quenz, Germany, in about the month of May 1942, unlawfully pretend to said German government that they were saboteurs, and by means thereof did fraudulently obtain from said German government the sum of $180,000 in money, 4 or 8 boxes full of explosives, and a free trip across the Atlantic in a submarine. The argument has been made that these men did not actually commit sabotage. Granted, these men were stopped before they actually did any sabotage work, but the offense was not only planning to do this, being schooled to do it, but coming through our lines. The whole proposition comes to this, that it is not a question of whether they actually got to the place where they could sabotage something, but they did come through the lines for that purpose. And the only reason they did not do it was because they were caught by the FBI before they could get to the place of the crime. I'm trying to make this as short as I can.
The Commission hopes that you will take all the time necessary to make your point.
Coppa was smart. He knew his men. He was not the dumbbell that these defendants would have you believe him to be. I cannot conceive it possible that a man of Coppa's ability and position would take for an expedition of this kind 8 morons, as you might say, who had no intention of going through with this at all. Every one of the 8 defendants has claimed that he did not intend to do this, and while admitting that he did all of these things, they came simply to get out of Germany. In other words, they claim that instead of being invaders, they're refugees. Thank you.
I hesitate somewhat to speak in view of the admirable analysis of the case by the Judge Advocate General, and also because the facts speak for themselves and speak loudly. What a defendant may have done to assist the government may amount to a little, or it may amount to a great deal. That is a matter of clemency for the appointing authority. I respectfully urge the Commission to take into consideration the old maxim of courts. Clemency is a matter for the appointing authority and is not a matter for the court. The question before this Commission is, are these men guilty or are they not of the crimes and offenses charged? You must remember that these defendants were not men who were caught in the war and were seeking to get back here. They, with their past associations with the Bund, their German citizenship, their Nazi Party affiliation, they all went back to Germany before the war between us and Germany broke. All except one. They went over to join Germany. Perhaps they were soldiers, sworn to obedience. Perhaps they were young, Perhaps they were neurotic. Nevertheless, they came over here and went behind our lines as spies and saboteurs. To say that you cannot find that because they now tell you without any corroboration that they never intended to do any of this is without logic. It seems to me that the prosecution has proved all the elements of all the charges. And I, of course, concur with the Judge Advocate General in asking for the death of all the defendants.
The prosecution and defense having nothing further to offer, the commission is closed.
The court clears, but Dow, Royal, and Ristine remain. Ristine gets up and shakes hands with Royal and Dowell and exits. Royal and Dowell sit dejectedly for a moment. A guard appears at the stage door right, whence the prisoners have exited.
Colonel Royal, Colonel Dowell, Colonel, sir!
Colonel, that young guard just brought up a statement he said was instigated by the defendant Carey. It is signed by all defendants except Dosh and Berger. The guard said that those who had signed it would not allow Dosh and Berger to sign it. Would you care to read it?
Read it to me, please.
Being charged with serious offenses in wartime, we have been given a fair trial. And before all, we want to state that defense counsel has represented our case as American officers unbiased, better than we could expect, and probably risking the indignation of public opinion. We thank our defense counsel for giving its legal ability in our behalf. And it's signed Urban Hans Haupt, Urban Otto Neubauer, Warner Thiel, Heinrich Harmhack, Gertrude Moretti, and Edward Carey.
Until we meet again, Colonel. Sir.
This just in from the New York Times. Army spy trial upheld by court. Ruling unanimous. Supreme Bench backs President's power over invading saboteurs. Chief Justice Stone read a per curiam opinion holding that the charges against the men's alleged offenses for which the President was authorized to order a military trial, that the commission was legally constituted, and that the Nazis were held in lawful custody.
Ernst Berger is sentenced to life in prison. George John Dosh, 30 years. The 6 others, Herbert Haupt, Heinrich Heinck, Richard Quirin, Hermann Neubauer, Werner Thiel, and Edward Curling, are informed of their sentence the following day.
The story's out. 6 Nazi saboteurs die in the electric chair, and an amazing German plot reaches its last act.
Newsreel cameras recorded a column of soldiers marching out of the vehicle gate, followed by the ambulances that contained the 6 dead terrorists. They are buried in a nearby pauper cemetery, their graves marked only by numbers. George John Dosh and Ernst Peter Berger are transferred to the federal prison in Atlanta, Georgia, to serve their long sentences. The first terrorist plot to unfold on American soil comes to an end without any destruction or loss of innocent life.
One of the few times American soil has ever been invaded. It's one of the few times that American industry, American citizens in their homes have been at threat from enemy military combatants in the country.
Fear of heights. No, there must be a Greek phobia name, but at my age I'm too lazy to look it up. My age, to quote the bard, that time of year thou mayst in me behold, when yellow leaves are none or few to hang upon these boughs, which shake against the cold, bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang. This flight of poetic fancy has absolutely nothing to do with our tale, but a writer must appear to be literate. Well, onward and upward. Did I say upward? That's what this is all about. In our backyard sat the First Baptist Church. Our house, 29 Harris Street, resided on a long lot that spanned Harris Street and Pleasant Street. Harris Street runs into Mugford Street, which almost runs into the old town hall, which if it weren't there would allow Mudford to become state, which runs down to the town wharf on the harbor. Got it? The geography is important for later developments. Where was I? Oh yes, climbing. You see, every 4th of July, all the church bells in town would ring for 15 minutes. Since our family attended First Baptist at that tender age, I assumed everyone chose the nearest church building to express religiosity. I knew the sexton and would help him out on Independence Day. Since tugging the rope from the vestibule was too arduous a task for a small boy and an almost as small old man, we would climb up in the steeple, reaching the belfry by a series of narrow stairs and ladders. Up and up, huffing and puffing we would go till finally we arrived at the top. There we would sit on either side of the huge brass bell and push it back and forth with our feet. Of course, we stuffed cotton in our ears. The loud clang would have been heard by a deaf haddock. One dark night, I wondered if you could see the lights of ships at sea from the top of the tower. I procured a flashlight and entered the church from the unlocked basement door. I reached the top and was peering through the slats amid pigeon feathers, droppings, and cobwebs when the town fire siren started to wail. The flashlight shining through the slats gave the illusion of a spire on fire. Some alert citizen must have called in the alarm. Soon a hook and ladder pulled up in front of the church, and helmeted and coated firemen, that's what we called them in those days, fire came much later, piled down the stairs leading to the first floor with axes at the ready. I got down to the door just in time to open it without the aid of the axes. Needless to say, my parents were neither pleased nor amused. I got what for so severely that sitting on a Chautauqua amp pew would have been cruel torture. But wait, there's more. A few months later, remember, this takes place early in the days of World War II, or did I not tell you that? Well, now you know. I walked onto the wharf at the foot of State Street and leaned over the rail to look at the boats. From the dark water below came a gruff, "Gott in Himmel," as one occupant of a rowboat must have skimmed his knuckles on an oarlock or something. Fascinated, I stared down, and suddenly a flashlight shone on my face, and some more German words meaning, I surmised, "Go get him," or some such, poured forth. I took off up State Street like a jackrabbit, pursued by goodness knows how many enemies, wondering what sanctuary to seek. Being a brave little boy, I didn't want them harassing my parents and siblings, so I made for the Baptist church. In through the basement door, I seized the flashlight that stood at the bottom of the steps and made it up the various stairs and ladders like a monkey after bananas. Would the light flashing through the slats once again perform its infamous purpose? Well, I guess it did, because once again the shriek of the siren shattered the still night. As for me, in the excitement of the moment, I managed to escape undetected, for which the seat of my pants is eternally grateful. Did this really happen? Or was all this the fertile imagination of an overaged raconteur? Many years after the war, I wintered in Castine, Maine. There I heard tales of 2 German spies who had been landed from a submarine off the shores of nearby Hancock. They boarded a train and headed south. To Marblehead?
Very good.